Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 31st Historic Calgary Week. My name is Marie Forrester, and I would like to thank you for coming to our presentation today, the Turner Valley Oilfield Society Storymap Project. I would like to introduce our speaker today, Larry Kapustka, who has worked as a professor, government research scientist, and consultant in the areas of ecological risk assessment, ecosystem services, and sustainability. 40 years of experience in basic and applied ecology, his work has extended across a wide range of topics involving natural sciences and environmental policy. His work has earned international status as a certified emeritus senior ecologist and a CTAC fellow. If we were here in person, I would actually offer a prize for the first one who could tell me what CTAC is. If you want to look it up, it's a really neat worldwide organization. So Larry and his partner Susan Christopherson moved to Canada in 2005, came to Turner Valley in 2014, and have been very active in the community, serving on the board of this Turner Valley Oilfield Society from 2015 through to 2019. He was a founding member and served on the board of the Foothills Energy Co-op, and is still a founding member of the private nonprofit organization Diamond Valley Sustainability Living Center. Beyond the technical fields in which he has published more than 100 peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, and books, Larry, our Renaissance man, has also authored Gifts for Santa, Collected Dreams and Confessions, and co-produced Vistas of the West, a book of poetry and art. And in this particular case, he was instrumental in securing a grant from our Calgary Foundation in support of the Storymap project. And this project is focused on bringing the rich history of the Turner Valley oil field to all of us. And so Larry, please, would you go ahead and tell us more about this great project?
Well, thank you, Marie. So this background picture is of the Turner Valley area quite a few years ago when the oil field was just getting started. And I want to give credit to Rod Mumby, who is the current chair. I used to be chair of this society. So the Turner Valley Oilfield Society was founded in 1978, and it played a lead role in gaining provincial and federal historical designation for both the gas plant and the oil field itself. The mission statement of the TVOS is to enhance the public understanding and knowledge of the unique history of the people and the petroleum discovery and development in southern Alberta, centered on the Turner Valley oil field and the Turner Valley gas plant. And another aspect of the mission statement is to promote energy literacy. So the Storymap project, we're inviting you to join in this interactive map adventure that looks at the colorful origins of our societies here. And the Stoney Nakoda referred to this in translation, it means along the foothills. So the concept behind this project is that photographs tell stories that connect people with memories, familiar places, and teach us about the past in ways that can feel very personal. We've digitized photos that are linked to a map location, and this will create a vivid photographic and geographic history of the area. The way we went about doing this, we had a custom database built. It was a template that allowed us to upload images and documents into the fields. We can identify the person, places, or events that are associated with that image. We can designate what year the image was taken if we know it. We also supply keywords that provide a searchable function to the database. And it allows us to have both a short and a long narrative description of the importance of that particular image or event that we're dealing with. So I'm just briefly going to show you the database, give you a brief demo here. This is what the dashboard of this database looks like. We have an opportunity to accept public submissions, for example. So if any of you happen to have images of interest to this particular story as you see how it plays out, we invite you to upload that information and we'll review it. And if it's acceptable, add it to our system. We have map points. And right now, if we go to that point, we see that we have 196 entries in the database at this point. And I received about, I think it's 11 or 12 more that I just haven't had time to load up in the last day or so. And we will continue to add to this developing database as time goes forward. I'll just give you a quick little peek into one of these. We get this series of photographs that we can have several associated with the same entry. And so this is one of the old churches, St. James Anglican Church. We have in this then the location in latitude and longitude that maps onto a base map, just sort of like a Google map system. We identify what region it's from, whether it's associated with a particular theme that I'll talk a little bit more about in a while. It identifies who the owner of the photograph was, and there can be a brief description. Now, some of these will have a very lengthy description, and we will, instead of just photographs, we will upload a PDF file to allow the user to get a much more extended insight into the importance of that particular aspect. So going back to the form here, we also have another output of the database. And what you see here is that it just is a different display. It gives our logo. It gives the different images. This happens to be of Malcolm Miller. And I will show you some screenshots of this in a little while that will give a little bit more detail, some more interesting aspects. We are connecting the information that's in this database to the base map, which is basically a Google Earth image. It's a base map that will focus, of course, on the Foothills County, but it is just extends as far as Google Earth does. So we have introduced 3 themes, curated themes, if you will. We have the First Nations and the frontier. What we describe in this is who was here, who passed through, and who stayed. Theme 2 is of the cattle barons, cowboys, and pioneers. And this will originate with some of the cattle drives that came up from Texas and created the iconic cowboy tradition. And then we focus on some of the ranchers, farmers, and hamlets of the area. The third theme is about the wildcatters and the oil barons. So we will lead us from the discovery, the development, and all of the different aspects of what's in the Turner Valley gas plant and other facilities in the area. I meant to go to, well, there it is. I want to go to this base map to give you an indication of the what a viewer, a user of this will see. And so again, we're inviting you along the foothills for this interactive map excursion on the east slopes of the Rockies. We have the map here. So each of the items in the database has been pinpointed by the lat long, and it's coded by different categories. So we have the racetrack at Millerville, for example, here, and each of these will have the description that comes out of the database. And I'll have some screenshots that are a little easier to see. I'll go through that in a moment. So our first theme of the First Nations and the frontier, who was here? So we talk about the First Nations that occupied this region since the last ice age. Some of this was in the land acknowledgement that was at the beginning of this program. Who passed through, and this is an image of John Palliser. Many of you in Calgary probably are familiar with that name, at least. And it talks about some of the other folks who came here in the 1870s, most notably the McDougalls, and how they interacted with the Morley nation of the Stoney Nakoda. We then have the theme of the pioneers, cattle barons, cowboys and pioneers. And here we begin to see the story emerging from the cattle drives that came up from Texas. In 1836, Texas became a republic. And then after the US Civil War, and slightly before that even, cattle drives started to move northward all the way to Alberta. And in this particular case, we see an image of John Ware in front of his homestead, one of the iconic features of this area. We also had members that stopped off from the cattle drives and populated the Bayou Ranch. So in 1881, the cowboys were well entrenched in the lifestyle of southern Alberta. There were many other folks of importance, so that Harry Lonnebaugh, the Sundance Kid, for example, Charlie Russell, the Western artist, some of the really interesting characters of the time came through the Bayou. This is an image here of Malcolm Miller, who arrived, and I'll have a little bit more to describe in a screenshot later on, and some of his different horses. And then we have the third theme of the wildcatters and oil barons. So that we have in this the descriptions of how they first came to understand that there was a resource in the ground here. It started out, the First Nations knew of these seeps that appeared in various places along waterways. Some of the folklore is that one of the Stoney Nakoda women was the first to show evidence of a seep to some of the colonizers. And then John Ware was supposed to have collected some samples and passed it on, but nothing came of it. And as is often the case, when history is recorded, it has to be documented in a certain way. And so when this was done by the Stuart Herron, William Stuart Herron, he had the foresight to send it off to universities in Pennsylvania and California, and the assay results came back indicating that it was indeed a petroleum product. And so this image that you're seeing here is a group of very interested investors that flocked down from Calgary to look at what was going on here. And so we talk about some of these aspects in the various towns that sprung up along the way of Turner Valley, Black Diamond, Naphtha, Hartel, Little Chicago, Little New York, which is now Longview. And there were some colorful areas of Turner Valley as well. so that there was a Dogtown, Poverty Flats, Snob Hill, where all of the executives lived. And so really a rich story about what goes on in this area. So going through some of the individual slides that we have in here. This is of Paul Spotted Wolf Amos. He was a respected Stoney Nakoda elder, worked very closely with the ranching community. And we have a few of these types of photographs that were taken in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. John Ware, as I mentioned before, was an early pioneer. He came up through the cattle drives, settled in the Millerville and Kew area after having worked at the Bayou Ranch for a while. He was a very intriguing man. He was born into slavery, and it's not quite clear whether it was in Tennessee or Virginia or perhaps even somewhere else. In and about the area of 1845 is when he was born. After the Civil War, he went on to Texas and then came up, as I said, with the cattle drives. He homesteaded in a place called Kew, which is no longer existing. It was basically a stopover store area south of Millerville. But he homesteaded there in 1887. And he married Mildred Lewis of Calgary, and they had a family with 6 children, 2 who served in World War I and were decorated for their service in that area. As I mentioned, Malcolm Turner, very colorful character. He is the person that Millerville is named after. He's a pioneer, a rancher, and a merchant. He came to Canada from England and had made his way west from Quebec. In this next slide, Susan Robbie Dunn, who worked on this as a historian, came across this letter that was attributed to him. He wrote in 1880, in which he requested to be put into the service of the mounted police. And it was successful, and that's how he came out to this part of the world. There are not many of the women that were given full status in terms of understanding their role in shaping this area. A sign of the times, I guess. But one of these was the wife of Joseph Fisher, Elizabeth Stagg. She was 19 years old when she married Joseph Fisher, who was 55 years old at the time. Quite an interesting situation. She had only met him once when she was a mere child, and must have had quite an interesting life, but she went on to become a very important aspect of this community. And the Fisher Ranch is one of those areas that is very prominent in shaping this particular region of southern Alberta, called the Cemetery Residence. A friend of mine, Dorothy Jackson, had created biosketches of more than 50 people who are buried in the cemetery. And as I mentioned, women weren't always given the status of being even recognized fully. And so many residents were simply identified as Mrs. instead of their first names. And so one of Dorothy's comments was that she needed to do a lot of research to make sure that she put the right woman in the grave with this, when there were 2 of the same surname. She didn't want to get them mixed up and forever be entangled in that. The oil field itself got started in earnest in May of 1914. It had been, the drilling had started in 1912. And these 2 gentlemen, Martin Hovis, the chief driller, and Joseph Brown, were brought in to run a cable tool to dig for the oil. And it was grueling work. They worked 12-hour shifts. And we have a fair amount of information of this in the website and in this particular story map. The result of their work led to this becoming the first commercially viable petroleum industry in Western Canada. And these black dots indicate all the different wells that were drilled in the Turner Valley oil field. You see a few scattered out around it, but for the most part, it defines the zone from Millerville to Longview. It's about 31, 32 kilometers in length and about 5 kilometers in width. And even within the town of Turner Valley, each of these little dots represents a well that was dug, and they're still to this day going through decommissioning of some of those wells that had been abandoned quite some time ago once they lost their productivity. The Turner Valley Gas Plant, which I mentioned, is recognized both provincially and federally as a historic entity, has a number of extant buildings. We have information about a lot of buildings that are no longer present, but we have here then numbered the compressor plant, the absorption plant, the scrubbing plant. These are the order of flow of the product as it goes through towards refinement and ultimately being creating a commodity that can be sold. And we have another older diagram of the flow chart of how the operation functioned. So some of the buildings that exist, this is of the gasoline and propane building. It was constructed in 2 different phases, 1933 and 1942. The originals were all destroyed in fires. The first gas plant was an absorption plant that was fairly crude. It was built in 1914. It burned down in 1920, and then the construction of these other facilities followed. Now here we have the absorption plant, which is where we remove oil from the mix of the liquid hydrocarbon, and it generates naphtha from the wet gas. So these are different phases of that operation over time. The scrubbing plant was a facility that was needed to extract the hydrogen sulfide gas that particularly came in 1924 with the Royal Light number 4 well that was struck just north of present-day Turner Valley. The hydrogen sulfide gas is poisonous. It can kill people. It has a smell of rotten eggs, and it's also quite corrosive, so that the stories of the early days of operations here is that no one painted their houses because the paint would only last a couple of years before it was corroded off. There are also suggestions that fences for livestock had to be replaced fairly frequently because the caustic nature of the hydrogen sulfide would corrode the wire to where it was no longer serving as a barrier. Later on, that sulfur product was, the hydrogen gas was converted to make elemental sulfur and was used as a commodity, a product from the plant itself. The compressor building is one of the really interesting ones. These were custom-made compressors, 600 horsepower, the Cooper Bessemer compressors. They started building them in 1938. And one of the reasons they needed to have these compressors is that there had been so much drilling and extracting of the product that the pressure inside the formation was no longer sufficient to move the product through the facility. So they had to put the pressure into the pipe system that would then drive it through the different stages of cleaning and separation, and then push it on to Calgary in the initial days at least. This would have been a very noisy place, and it preceded all of the kinds of things that we now have for ear protection. But there was a sign, very faded sign, that says if you're going to be in here more than 6 hours to wear some ear protection. I don't know that you'd need it after that long. The Hoyton Spheres are sort of an iconic symbol of the gas plant today. These have been refurbished. They date back to 1942, and it was a government mandate to start collecting the isopropyl materials that was then used, isobutene, to make high octane aviation fluid, a fuel that was used to train the bombers for World War II, bomber pilots and fighter pilots. So this was a really important aspect. Turner Valley was considered a prime target if in the event that there had been any military activity or sabotage taking place in Canada. And so there were guards placed all around the facility during World War II as a protective measure. This story map we intend to launch in next month sometime. There's still a few tweaks that we want to go through, and it will be available through the Turner Valley Oilfield Society website. I want to acknowledge that the Calgary Foundation provided us a grant to begin this project. The Turner Valley Oilfield Society contributed a substantial portion as well. We had great cooperation from the Millerville Q Pritis Bragg Creek Historical Society, where they supplied us with many colorful individuals, stories of these individuals. Jason Spizak of Spizak Tech IT Solutions provided us the database, and Jamie Thomas of the Old Man River Regional Service Commission is producing the base map that the data is brought into play. And I want to also acknowledge Susan Robbie Dunn, who is the historian and has a great series of books that she's produced on the war histories. And I commend her work to anyone who has an interest in tracking some of these impressive people of the wartime era. The Storymap Committee was several people. Rod Ross was one of the co-directors and early on identified this as a viable project. Al Lambden, Kate Diamond, Bernard Damon, Christy Cheeseman, Loretta Stabler, and Donna Elko Nash were also contributors to this. So if you have interest in finding out more, you can contact me directly or contact the TVOS website or the email address of TVOS. And with that, I thank you, and we'll exit.
Thank you so much, Larry, for that amazing presentation and sharing all that knowledge with us. Definitely learning quite a lot this week, and especially today as well. We'll start off with a question from Elizabeth. How did Turner Valley workers travel back and forth to Calgary?
Well, there were very few roads, as you can imagine, back in the day. The equipment had to be brought in during wintertime when the river was frozen or any of the wet areas were frozen. There were some rutted trails, and the image that I showed of the investors down there, they had traveled by Model T and other kinds of transportation in trucks and so on to get down to the area. It was an all-day journey to navigate. Probably had to repair flat tires a few times along the way. The workers themselves, most of them lived right in the vicinity, as is true of many of the resource areas, resource projects anywhere, even today. But there were a couple of jobs, one job in particular that would have been quite interesting. There were line walkers. Line walkers would follow the pipelines that came from Turner Valley to Calgary. And so they would make that trip looking to see if there were any leaks in the pipeline. So those people had pretty good exercise routines of being able to walk from Turner Valley to Calgary and back.
Oh, that's awesome. The next one is from Jackie. Beside the map, what other activities is Turner Valley is planning?
Well, we had been doing a speaker series. We had several speaker series events before COVID hit. And so we had to suspend that. And I don't know that the group has gotten back on track to doing another one. But it certainly won't be this year. We've tried to bring those in line with the Discovery Day. So around May 14th each year, we were trying to have this speaker series, but that's been probably the most visible. We also have the website that we try to basically pop up new information, new events, and keep people abreast of what we're doing.
Great.
I should also say that we have had some educational opportunities. So as an example, we've made presentations to the 4th grade class here in Turner Valley a couple of times. We're not sure what's going to happen as the new curriculum rolls out. I understand that that's a bit of a dog's breakfast at the moment as far as how the teacher is going to be able to integrate different kinds of activities. So we'll see.
Awesome. Next one is from C.W. Brown. When you were doing this research, was there any surprises in terms of people you hadn't heard of or unusual stories that came out?
Well, yeah, there is one of them. I was interested in David Blacklock because the road that I live on is named after him. So David Blacklock was a character, loved to go out in nature, loved to take basically what would be equivalent to Boy Scouts, just training youth to get out and experience nature. Well, he was working in a coal mine along the Sheep River, and the coal mine collapsed, and he was trapped inside. He was fearing that the whole thing was going to collapse on him. And so he had the 2 people that were with him pull him out. And then one story I heard is they even had to use a log chain to tie it onto his feet to pull him out. And in the process, he had a dislocated hip. And he never did see a doctor at the time. And when he finally was brave enough to go see a doctor, the hip had already healed in an abnormal way, and so he was crippled for the rest of his life. But that really didn't stop him. So Sandy McNabb, a name that is associated with a park out here, and some other folks, Bob Carey, one of the war veterans, who had also lost a leg, they rigged a rocking chair onto a pack animal, the pack saddle, and David Blacklock would ride on that rocking chair to go up into the mountains on these hunting and fishing expeditions. So those are the kinds of things that happen. There are a lot of things that are in an older publication called In the Light of the Flare. Some of that is really not accessible the way people access information these days. I mean, it is online, it is searchable. We have the entire book on the TVOS website. But today, people tend to think of things a little more visually and a little more rapidly rather than reading long paragraphs. So that's sort of the reason we wanted to put this story map together to bring it to life.
Thank you for sharing that interesting story. The next one is, how did they initially, from 1914 to 1920, move the liquid hydrocarbons to market? By wagon or trucks to Calgary? Did they have wooden storage tanks near or in railroads or some other facility in Calgary?
Well, initially it was loaded into barrels and on a wagon and transported that way. The product in those early days has had an octane in the upper 50s, and it was suitable to just take the condensate directly from the well and put it into vehicles. And so people would bring glass jugs or other canisters down to the facility here and fill them up and put them directly into their vehicle. So that was the way it was. The condensate was being moved. The gas was moved through a pipeline. Initially, there had been a pipeline from Bow Island in the south near towards Brooks, and that had come into Calgary, and that supplied the streetlights and cooking fuel for stoves that were equipped for gas. But the pipeline here then connected into that and transported the gas product into Calgary.
Great. Next one, with all the chemical exposures at the time, do you have any comments about reproductive abnormalities and chronic illness with families in the area?
Well, this is one of the interesting aspects of some history. There's not anything really documented to that effect. There are rumors that there were problems. I think if we had the same tools available to look at things today, we would find that it was probably not a very healthy situation to be breathing the hydrogen sulfide gas that was available to every resident, child, and like. But there just weren't documented indications of adverse health. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. We just don't have anything documented.
Okay. Next one, would Turner Valley have provided fuel to the first Trans-Canada flight in 1920 for a de Havilland DH-9A in October 11, 1920, heading to Vancouver?
I don't think so. I think it would have been something from the east, but I don't know that for certain.
Okay. What happened to Hovis and Brown?
I think Brown went to California, and I think Hovis may have gone to Texas. I don't know the exact thing, but as with many of the folks who worked in those days, they were itinerant workers. They moved to the next job, and so they were probably only here 2 or 3 years, and then they would move on to the next opportunity.
I'm not sure if you've seen a comment come in from Terry. She says, Hovis is my great grandfather. He stayed in Alberta.
Oh, okay. Well,
Just came in.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Let's see. I'm going to quickly have a glance to make sure I haven't missed any questions. Oh, there's another one that's come in just now. Did this store the 1920 product in Calgary in wooden storage tanks? I noticed large tanks in the 1922 aerial photo.
I don't know that for certain. I'll have to defer if you send a note to the website or to me, I'll forward it to David Lynch, who would probably be able to answer that.
how widespread was TV product used in TV or Calgary? TV in Calgary, I'm assuming they're asking.
Well, the petroleum products that came out of this oil field prior to discoveries at Leduc in the 1940s made up about 90%, 95% of all of the petroleum of Canada at that time. So it supplied this area, it supplied all of Western Canada and beyond. So it was the center, and that's the reason that Calgary grew up as the oil town long before Edmonton got that moniker. It was Leduc that happened to get the heavier oil products out, and that's why it's associated more with heavy oil. But before it was discovered there in Leduc, Calgary was closest to the oil center here in Turner Valley.
Awesome. Marie asks, who was the oldest person you were able to talk to about the history?
Well, I haven't talked to the person directly in this project, but there's a really interesting woman here in Black Diamond that was 104 years old. So Hernan Brown is, she came here when she was 15. She talked about what it was like in the Turner Valley area at the time. People lived in very simple shacks that were made out of the pellets, and often they were mobile buildings. They just moved them when they needed to. So there was a big sea change in lifestyle happened from the early days of the 1910s to what we see today.
Okay, great. Next question is, why are the Turner Valley oil fields and gas plants considered important for Alberta and Canada?
Well, as I mentioned, there was just the sheer volume of petroleum product that came out of here, and it's still a producing oil field. If the Turner Valley oil field hadn't been discovered, Calgary probably would not have become a major international community. So it's really important in that respect. But beyond that, the people that were here were really quite innovative. They had to figure out how to do things on the fly. For example, there was when Royal 4 came in, it was a gusher, it was on fire, and they, at the time, didn't think it was possible to stop any of this. It would just burn out forever. And they were able to figure out how to cap that. Later on, there was the need then to figure out how to clean hydrogen sulfide out of the gas. That technology went worldwide. There were regulatory aspects that came in. So the energy regulators came in, not to the liking of any of the people that were doing the work here, but they had to regulate how much, which wells would be producing and which ones had to be on hold so that the pressure wouldn't completely leave the system and then make it impossible for anybody to extract the petroleum products. So I think it's those kinds of innovations that took place, not only on the technical side, but also in the social and political governing side, that we have some opportunities to learn lessons from that as we approach the new energy challenges of today. How do we solve some of the problems? How do we apply that same sort of ingenuity and do things in a wise way? What they did initially probably wasn't always the right thing, but it was functional, and then they corrected as they went. So I think we have to figure out how to have that kind of ingenuity and insightfulness and curiosity to solve some of the challenges that we face today.
Thank you, Larry. One more question here. What can we learn from the petroleum experience that can help us with the challenges of energy today?
Well, I think I might have just answered that with this last bit of just trying to learn those. How do we develop new technologies, new insights? I was just reading an article this morning that some engineers have figured out how to reconfigure solar panels that makes them 1,000 times more effective in capturing solar energy and turning it into electricity. Those kinds of innovations are sitting out there. People haven't thought about them yet. But if they're encouraged, if they're given enough tools to be able to pursue that, I think we'll have an opportunity to solve some of the problems.
We have a question from Terry. When will this website be available to the public?
The website is available now. The Storymap will be launched hopefully within a month.
Thank you so much, Larry. You've done a great job giving us all that information and sharing your knowledge, and also taking the time to answer all those questions that have come in. I would just now pass it over to Marie to close us off for this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Hamza. I was just thinking, I wanted to thank, I didn't plan for this, but I really want to thank the people as well who added comments or questions, because you helped me making real the statement that Larry knows everything. Two years ago, we started talking about this, and he just has such a wealth of information that he brought to the project and that he learned from the people that he was working with. So Larry, thanks so much for being able to share it even today, for getting on our, as well as on the map. And so 2 words I know often strike love in the hearts of people who love history, and that is story and maps. And so I commend you and your committee for putting the 2 together. I just think that's a fabulous idea. I know they're designated heritage sites, but it is the story and the chance to see the surrounding area that makes that designation really come true. And so you can probably also tell by a couple of Larry's comments that Larry and the people there did do a really fully encompassing job of trying to get the true picture, or as full as they can. And I'll never, that image of that person trying to put the right husband with the right wife, I'll never lose that. And I'll be glad that the wives and the indigenous people or anybody a little on the sidelines or whatever could get into this, into your database. And then Larry, this was one of my first questions, and I know somebody else brought it up. This is the third thing that I just think this makes this project so important, Larry, is that you've done it so that it's evolving, it's a living thing, and that people can add their comments, send their comments into you, send their pictures into you, and then all of us will feel that we were able to help you and your committee add a little bit of history to that great project down there in Turner Valley. So Larry, thank you. Thank your committee. Truly, truly. May I just add, just confidentially, I know that you think you're in New Zealand and that you're watching somebody from a Tolkien story from the background there, but it's actually Larry's photo, and you are in Turner Valley, not in New Zealand. It's just been a joy to look at that. So thank you. And I just want to add some thanks as well, or remind you to check out our website, chinookhistory.ca, for any information regarding this or any of our other programs. And you'll also find our supporters, and you'll get an opportunity to join our society or donate if you wish to, and to find out about what's happening this full year.